Welcome to the Health Edge, translating the science of self-care. I am Mark Pettis, and with my friend and buddy John Bagnulo. John, good morning.
Good morning, Mark. Happy summer.
Happy summer into July 1. The months
Yeah,
just fly by. And this is that time of year where you'd like it to slow down a little bit.
yeah,
But
exactly.
it is, yeah, we were just sharing before we hit the record button, John, of just how awesome it is to be driving around town, seeing the kids playing little league and kids out playing soccer. And I'll go a full day sometimes in my neighborhood and not see any kids,
Mm.
riding their bikes or hanging out. But so when they're all out, sort of doing the summer thing, it's brings me joy, and I think for a lot of
Yeah,
it brings you back to those times as a kid,
yeah.
which
It also brings me a lot of joy to be able to go outside barefoot in the morning without worrying about frostbite. It's just such a great free time of year in terms of like just whenever you can go outside, it's usually beautiful, and then like you said, you feel like it only lasts a month, so you want it to slow down. That's for sure.
definitely. Well, we have a recent review. This was an excellent article published in the Lancet Public
Mm.
Health,
Yeah,
UK, European, just a very highly respected peer-reviewed journal that provided a really nice update, a very thoughtful update on walking and the remarkable health benefits of
yeah,
walking. And I think what we will both sort of emphasize as we look at this paper, John, is a theme that we've often reflected on with respect to exercise, and that principle is very what some might consider low, maybe even insignificant amounts of movement, like 15 minutes of walking, has a greater risk reduction, a greater health benefit than what one might fully appreciate. And this article did a really nice job of reviewing lots of studies, and we can get into that. And we also have there was a second paper which we'll share. It's not the focus of this review, but it was a recent similar review, but it focused more on the mechanisms of
yeah,
walking. And again, while you're out there just having a nice relaxed walk, you might not realize that your DNA is being regulated, that your biome is being modulated, that your cognition and mental mindset is being fine tuned, and so uh,
yeah.
there's so much going on that may or may not reach that level of full appreciation for the person doing it. And so this is a um, kind of a nice gift to unwrap, in my view, John.
Yeah, no, it's incredible how ubiquitous I think the positive effects are on our physiology, right? And I think we tend to really lock in on the heart, because that's what has been ingrained in us since we were probably pretty young, that, cardiovascular, just the word cardiovascular exercise, you're thinking heart. But to your point, I mean, just to think about the benefits neurologically they're pretty dramatic, and your risk reduction for neurological decline, cognitive impairment. I think that really stands out to me most notably in these papers.
Yes, and while these studies are never designed to look specifically at the context within which one might be walking, but we often will comment. If you're out walking outside, you're getting some of that morning sunshine or late day, early evening sunshine. Maybe you're walking in the woods and just fully immersed in nature. Maybe you're walking with a pet or a friend, right? So there's the walking, and then there's the context within which you can start to sort of layer independent
Mm.
effects that are very complementary. And so this time of year, I'm reminded that there's probably a big difference between walking maybe at the mall, if you have
Hmm.
a mall that's still open in your town, or walking on a treadmill in a club versus just going outside in the
Hmm.
morning and walking in that early morning sunshine. And so, um, uh, there are many ways that one can add to that
Absolutely.
modest
Yeah.
effort.
Yeah, absolutely. I forget the name of the Japanese researcher that coined the term forest bathing. I'm sure you've heard of this before.
Yeah, Shinrin Yoku
Wow, that's
is
impressive, buddy. Wow.
yeah, the Japanese uh, just, and it's so ingrained in their culture how that philosophy is
It's
inherent
incredible.
in everything they do. This
Right.
and they
Yeah, my point being, if you add that to the layer, right, you add that to the walking, you're getting even more of these inputs that we know really shift a lot of our biochemistry in the right direction.
definitely. Well, let me share my screen here, John. We've got a few slides that we'll share. These will be on our website for those who want to review them in more detail. So this paper was published last July, and it's from, as we said, Lancet Public Health. And this, um, they did two sort of methodologies here, John, which I think are important. One is what is referred to as a systematic review. And I think our listeners are probably very aware of what a systematic review is, right? These are thoughtful and um, um, reviews that look at various clinical databases, and the science of systematic reviews has continued to evolve. So
Yeah.
there are criteria, there are tools that are used to extract data and to try to minimize bias. These have become very sophisticated in terms of the process. But a systematic review, of course, is a nice up to date
Hmm.
state of
Yeah.
the science, and then they did a meta analysis. And unlike a systematic review, what a meta analysis will do for those who may not be aware of the difference is a meta analysis will also go back and look at several studies. But what they attempt to do is to increase the power of any particular study by pooling data from those studies. So, a study that may have had a smaller number of individuals, when pooled with another study of a similar methodology, enhances the power just by increasing the number of subjects. And so there are two sort of aspects to the data that this group looked at. And this is out of Australia from the Sydney Faculty of Medicine and School of Public Health. And just sort of to cut right to the chase here, John, right? So this was a systematic search that was done in 2024. They went back 10 years. They found several studies. They had 13 other reviews that they included and into this publication that somehow addressed the connection between how many steps a person takes each day with important health outcomes. And often those health outcomes are limited to mortality, cardiovascular. They tend to fall into the cardiovascular category. One of the things that I appreciated with this study, John, is they looked at many other
Hmm.
comorbidities, including fall risk, cancer, type 2 diabetes, dementia. A bit more global in the
Hmm.
outcomes that they address. And so looking at all-cause mortality, cardiovascular disease incidence, and incidence refers to essentially new cases. How many new cases of heart attacks did one see during the period of study? Dementia, depression, physical function, and falls, which are, we talk a lot about lean body mass and
Yeah.
metabolic health and strength. And again, falls could be the single most common breaking point, a tipping
Hmm.
point in terms of quality of life downhill, loss of independence, and then this sort of stacking of other health complications. So this is so important. Anything one can do to reduce those risks down the road. So the study here showed consistent associations across all these outcomes, John. In other words, right, the more walking one did, all of these outcomes showed some measurable and statistically significant and clinically significant reductions in mortality and in diabetes incidence, cancer incidence, dementia, depression, right? I mean, what pill can do this?
Yeah, it's fascinating because when I look at it, and again, I'm somewhat tainted by years of looking at research that shows the effects of, let's say, a deficiency, a nutrient deficiency, right? When I look at these, this study in particular, Mark, and I look at the findings, and I look at, again, how widespread the favorable effects are with respect to our health with very small doses of exercise, I look at it sort of like a very similar study to what would be shown with a nutrient deficiency, which is when you have very small amounts of something occurring, you have such protective effects on widespread, right, biochemical pathways. I think I see the same thing here, and it speaks to the importance of exercise, that we have a requirement. The human body has a requirement for walking every day. That's the position I would take when I look at these numbers. And if you don't meet that requirement, it's just like having a nutrient deficiency. I mean, look at the vitamin D deficiencies, how, right, just how pervasive those effects are, every aspect of our health. And again, it's a hormone, but you could look at what's generated by 15 to 20 minutes of walking, and you could say there's a requirement physiologically for that.
I love that, John. And it makes me think of what we've often talked about with sunlight deficiency syndrome, we might call it, right? Or
Yeah, yeah,
how little time people spend in nature deficiency
absolutely. Yeah,
syndrome. And I love that because this is central to who we are as a species. And uh, vitamin W, I guess we'll call this.
yeah.
That's a great observation. When you look at the number of steps that they began to see these significant reductions in risk, John, it's important to note that these are not large volumes of steps, right? They found that at around 7,000 steps per day is when you really see things uh,
Hmm.
shifting. Those curves really start to separate. We'll look at those curves in a moment. But they found a wide range, but consistently anywhere from 6 to almost 50% lower risks compared to, say, taking only 2,000 steps per
Hmm.
day. And so there is a dose response. And um, I think we would also suggest that uh, more might be better, but again, this is just a good target, and the sort of 10,000 steps per day has become a generalized recommendation,
Right,
which is
right.
fantastic. Uh, but this would suggest that threshold could be lowered some.
Yeah.
And what they weren't able to find a strong relationship in, because this is an obvious question, is does it matter how fast you're walking? If I take 7,000 steps and I'm moving at a pretty good clip, and I take 10 minutes doing that versus say 20 minutes, is there a difference? And while there certainly may be a difference, the data is inconclusive. But I think for the most part, anytime you look at any other study where the cardiac demand is increased, where you're increasing your heart rate and your breaths per minute, you do tend to see, independent of the number of steps that you're taking, additional benefit. But that didn't jump out from the
Yeah.
data that they reviewed here.
Yeah, and if I were to try to say that it's less important, I would look at previous investigations where the authors conclude it's the total amount of work someone does at the end of the day as opposed to the speed at which they do it, right? So if someone's going to walk a mile, whether that's at 6 minute or 10 minute pace, they're basically accomplishing the same amount of work. And so I've heard the argument made by exercise physiologists and others that, that's probably more, if you had to choose, it's more important to get the work in, even if it's at a slower pace. But again, to your point, we know that higher intensities tend to produce some changes in different areas of our health that are stressors, right? That when we adapt to it, we come out on the better side of things. So I see it both ways, but I like the fact that they use steps, Mark, because I think just again, to your point, 10,000 has become the goal for so many people. And I think it's a good goal, don't get me wrong, but to show that only 7,000 still produces the kind of results that this does, it's I think it's powerful.
Very much so. And these are the results ultimately that were seen from the study itself based on our meta-analysis, again, pooling data from several studies. Compared with 2,000 steps per day, 7,000 steps per day was associated with a 47% lower risk of all-cause mortality. These are hazard ratios. So a 47% risk reduction would be a hazard ratio of 0.53, and that's a very dramatic risk reduction. And when you look at what we often look at in terms of the integrity of the data are these confidence intervals. And the importance of this is if your confidence intervals are a tight cluster around that hazard ratio, and here you see a really tight confidence interval, that would suggest a very strong cause and effect,
Dose response.
the dose response and the integrity of that data,
Yeah.
as opposed to a confidence interval that might go, say, 0.46 to 1, where data is all over the place, and your ability to sort of trust the integrity of the conclusions that you're making won't be as solid. They found a 25% lower risk of cardiovascular disease incidence. And again, that's a hazard ratio of 0.75. And again, pretty tight confidence intervals here. Anything that crosses 1, you can almost ignore the data as meaningful or significant. And then cardiovascular disease mortality, like all-cause mortality, also with a 47% risk. And again, very tight confidence intervals here. So that's a pretty robust finding.
Yeah.
And from a public health perspective, it definitely is. This is news to share. And again, just coming back to the cadence issue, and again, this is just from the study. Overall, we found the evidence too limited to inform stepping rate recommendations, or what they call cadence, as a sort of surrogate for the rate of your walking. More research is needed to investigate the relationship between cadence metrics and health outcomes, independent of stepping volume, to determine which cadence metric are the most relevant to public health messaging. I think we would agree, John, that, and as you so nicely put it, it's really just getting out and getting those steps in, worrying less about how fast you're moving. when you look at their data curves, and again, these are looking at the outcomes that we reviewed. These are the hazard ratios. And here you've got number of steps per day going up from left to right. And again, when you look at all-cause mortality, you can begin to see risk reduction even with lower numbers of steps for some of these outcomes. But here you sort of see that dose response.
That's incredible when you see these downward, right? These downward slopes that, they still don't really flatten out. They just continue to project downward. It really shows you the power of this. The
Exactly.
power of this one variable with respect to human health. I don't think you're going to find this with many other facets of lifestyle.
No, no. If you look at the sample sizes here, 161,000,
Incredible.
these are pooled data from meta-analyses from 14 studies, 120,000, 105,000, cancer mortality. These are huge effects. And again, and this is sort of less sexy than mortality, right? But if you look at dementia, right, as we always say, motion is the lotion. We know that brain-derived neurotrophic factor goes up with activity. So much of the work that I've done through the years in population health is focused on falls, and this continues to be the single greatest reason for people losing their independence, requiring skilled nursing home support, losing their the health trajectory after a fall, particularly if you break your hip. The health trajectory, the mortality risk goes up dramatically after that sentinel event. So falls are the falls are to the human what the kiss on the forehead is to the mafia. That it is the future is not likely to be very good unless something is done to
Right.
reduce one's fall risk, and that brings you into this realm of regular movement, resistance, and all the things that we talk about all the time. But it's great that they looked at this. The magnitude of risk reduction isn't quite as robust, but it's still pretty darn good. And when you look at the dementia, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, that is.
No medicine that Big Pharma has produced over the last 40 years has been able to reduce dementia risk to this extent. And that pursuit continues without much. There just has not been much in that realm of pharmacologic intervention. And then again, these other outcomes, new cases of cancer, very modest. Again, you're almost crossing the sort of the null line here. Type 2 diabetes risks down a little bit more. And and again, you see very narrow sort of intervals here, depression. And I think that something as simple as walking, particularly when you're outside getting full spectrum and brighter light, as an intervention for depression, which is such a horrible experience for anyone confronting it, these are pretty attention-getting results.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the neurotropic factors that get released, even with modest exercise, are incredibly anti-inflammatory to the brain, really help restore the equilibrium there. But look at, that's a pretty steep curve for depression.
It is. And we talk a lot about resilience, John, how, in a modern contemporary life where, particularly from a mental health perspective, every time you pick up a newspaper or listen to the news, or maybe, you see people fighting each other.
Yeah, yeah.
There's so much conflict everywhere you look.
Amygdala overactivation, right? Just
Exactly.
it sinks the ship.
It
It
sinks the
sinks.
ship, and
Yeah,
it's sort of death by a thousand cuts. So
it is.
the
It
the
is.
the ability to create more resilience so that you can coexist with the cacophony of modern life in
Yeah,
a way that even though the tides will rise, you can rise with those tides and just go with them, right? You're riding those waves instead of being pulled down by them. And so these are great, not just interventions if someone is down and out, but if you want to just protect yourself and create more resilience, this is a great way to do it. And this, I thought I would just add this
yeah.
paper, John,
This is great.
because it's a nice paper, and it's from Geriatric Science, and it looks more at the mechanisms. This is a different group than the paper we just touched on. This is kind of a subject review and really well done. And we talked a lot about the blue zones, and the blue zones have become kind of a big marketing tool. I think sometimes the nuances of blue zone data are not widely appreciated, but nonetheless, in these parts of the world where people just walk, as you say, John, it's just an essential of life. You would never not
Yeah,
walk unless you had
right.
a reason that just was prohibitive for you to do so. And so we know that this is central to indigenous cultures that do
Yeah.
move a lot, that do certainly spend a lot of time outdoors and eat foods that are local and grown. And
And Mark, just if I could say one thing about these blue zones and not just blue zones, but also with respect to walking in general, I think the other part of this is it's really important to accept that slower pace of getting there, which I think a lot of those blue zones have with respect to walking, right? They're going to walk to, and this isn't possible for everybody because of maybe how rural someone might live, walking to the store or walking to see a friend may not be possible. But in many of those blue zones, these folks walk together and their walking is part of daily life in terms of maybe getting someplace, for a reason. So the walking isn't always a prescription per se, right?
yeah,
And I think and there's something to be said for that, I guess is what I was what I was trying to get at. I know it wasn't clear there. I kind of rambled, but I just think that the mindset around walking, and it goes back to the questions that are raised around the pace at which you walk or the intensity. I think if you look at walking as like again, you have a requirement for it, you can enjoy it, and you can integrate it into your day, whether you're walking with a friend or you're walking to discuss. And I know a lot of CEOs that I work with, that I do consulting with, a lot of these CEOs, these C-level professionals, right there, they're trying to incorporate walking into their business meetings because that's where we are now, where they look at their schedule and they say, I have to walk, but also I gotta meet with so and so for 30 minutes. Let's do both. And I think that to me is one of the more encouraging things that I've seen emerge in the last 5 years with my practice is just seeing how many people are just trying to incorporate that walking into just life as opposed to saying, well, I'm going to go to the gym and be on a treadmill. No, they're gonna find a park to walk in with someone they're trying to negotiate a deal with.
yeah, I love that, John. And is it possible that
Is it possible? Yeah.
making a decision in that context or trying to
Right.
come up with a more creative solution for addressing a particular problem will
Yeah.
be a more effective
Exactly.
decision because of the context within which you are doing that. And there's so much research in the
Think
in
about that, Mark. Think about that.
Dan
Think of
Goleman's work in
right.
emotional intelligence.
Exactly.
It
Exactly.
and it reminds me, John. Not to digress too much, but it's a good story. years ago, I had the great pleasure of meeting a guy named Roger Fisher, the late Roger Fisher. He wrote a book back in the early '70s called "Getting to Yes," and which I think today, 50 years later, is still one of the best-selling negotiation books ever. Fisher was a lawyer. He was at the faculty at Harvard Law School, and he was he did the Camp David talks for he was the architect of the Camp David talks for Jimmy Carter. At the time, it was Sadat in Egypt, and I think Begin was Israel's prime minister. It's a reminder that stuff's been going on in the Middle East. Just it seems like there's never. So anyhow, Fisher set all this up, and was involved in many major geopolitical negotiations. And he shared with me a story of he was asked to help mediate a land border dispute between the countries of Peru and Colombia. And these were leaders that did not like each other. They were, kind of enculturated to hate each other, right? Just an ongoing sort of that's just, we can't get out of our own way.
Yeah.
And so people weren't very optimistic that anything meaningful would come of this. So Fisher, did his research, learned a little bit about these people. And when they're setting up the negotiations, they're very specific and who's sitting where. So Fisher learns that both these guys are cigar smokers, and he finds out what their favorite cigars are, and they're like the second or third day into the negotiations, and there's a cigar in each place setting. They're sitting across from each other, but there's only one light. And
Brilliant.
He puts the light down next to the Peruvian. I don't know if they're president or prime minister. What that title is, but and so they decide. I don't know if we want to smoke these in this room here. Let's go out for a walk. And the Peruvian president lights his cigar, realizes that his Colombian counterpart doesn't have a light, reaches across and lights it, and then flash, photo op. Boom, 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 boom. Next thing you know, there's a picture of these two guys lighting a cigar together, and the front pages of both of their national, government-run newspapers that put so much pressure on them to then deliver, because they just saw that, holy shit, these guys are. So they go out and they go for a walk, and I think a book was written about this called "A Walk in the Woods," and that's awesome. They went with their negotiation teams, and this land dispute ended up becoming a. For one country, it was a concern of national security. So part of the deal was it would be a demilitarized zone. At no point could any.
Sure.
And then for the other country who thought that this was their sovereign land, they were concerned about national security. They said, well, okay, let's make this a national park for Colombia. It'll be a demilitarized zone. Fisher comes away. Several days later, they've got a deal. This conflict, at least for the time, is resolved, and it was all part of that choreography, and then ultimately a walk in the woods.
A cigar, and a walk. Broke tensions down, right? Yeah. That's awesome.
So sorry to digress.
No, it's beautiful.
But we'll end with with respect to this study that we were talking about, John. This I like this graphic. This is kind of a nice graphic of the sort of, to your point earlier, John, the sort of the global effects here of with walking, we um, do a better job of sensing nutrients, using nutrients, that sort of insulin, metabolic signaling. We know that mitochondria obviously benefit greatly. We turn on this, these are all epigenetic effects,
Yeah.
right? These repair systems that we have we've got our own repair systems, but they have to be activated. The
Yeah.
conditions have to be right for them to work. So most of the things that we confront, we can actually repair. But
Right.
if the conditions aren't right, those systems don't get optimally turned on. We know that inflammation, oxidative stress, right? These passports to accelerated aging are favorably modified. Epigenetics, endocrine, from sugar to blood pressure,
Yeah.
the usual suspects, decreasing these aging pro-inflammatory cells. So we do a better job of our autophagy, our recycling, and we've talked a lot in the past about these sirtuins, these regulatory genes that seem to turn on anytime we have these low-level stresses, whether it's
Right.
maybe time restricted eating or intermittent fasting, walking, more strenuous exercise,
Yeah.
ultraviolet light. And we know, of course, that all of these ultimately at the macro level are just helping our organ systems and ultimately our total body health. And some of the summaries from their studies, and again, I think just puts all that we've been talking about into a summary perspective, John. We know that mortality and longevity will improve as little as 15 minutes of walking. And fast is we put a caveat there. Just get out and walk. Don't worry
Yeah.
about the speed. um, and again, here they're 20%. The suggestion from the study we just looked at, that this effect might even be greater if you're getting out a little bit longer. Cardiovascular health we've talked about, metabolic health, weight control, right? These are, mental health, neurologic, and we've talked about BDNF and lowering the cortisol, the stress response, and certainly musculoskeletal health and all that comes with that. So this really is the holy grail, isn't it, John?
It is. I don't think, like you said, before and this morning, there's no pharmaceutical that would bring anything that is even close to this in terms of that dose response. And we have to look at it differently. We have to look at it that we have a requirement for walking, and it always goes back to that ancestral lens that you and I think appreciate so much, which is our ancestors walked, whether it was 5 miles a day or 8 miles a day. It depends on what anthropologist you talk to and where in the world or what early human population you were looking at. But it's really clear that our ancestors became incredibly effective, proficient walkers. And it was a big part of the human experience for hundreds of thousands of years. You have to have some of that on a daily basis. That's kind of my real high level look at this.
Well, that is a great point to conclude on, John. And we appreciate Health Edge listeners staying connected. And hopefully, this information is of some inspiration. And if you like what we're sharing, please share with those you love, your friends. John and I have minimal, if any, social media output. So this is all very granular, and so we appreciate your support. All of this content can be found at our website, thehealthedgepodcast.com. And John, until next week, stay safe and well, and embrace the summer fun.
Yeah, you as well, Mark. Enjoy the heat. I love you, buddy.
Yeah, love you too, my friend. Peace.